Walk me through the process of being diagnosed.
So around the age of 15, just before I was about to sit my GCSEs, my teachers kind of recognized that I was struggling quite a lot, particularly with writing for a long period of time. And there were certain subjects that I was really struggling with, like maths and science. And I was in this very, very academic and highly pressurized school. So they couldn't quite understand why I was really good at certain subjects like English, RS, history, but then the more maths and science was just a huge disparity. Um, so they suggested that I would go and see an educational psychologist to see if I could get any extra time. And to be honest, at that moment, it kind of felt a bit more like a pity rather than, we actually think something's wrong. It was really more like, just see if you can get extra time to help you, with your exams. And so off I went to the educational psychologist, and I spent a whole day with her, and she basically tested me. Well, she didn't know exactly what she was looking for at that point. It was definitely like a test geared around learning difficulties as a whole, then specifically around dyspraxia. And through the test, we did things like really simple things like drawing straight lines several times, seeing how my handwriting was and observing those things, doing even things like hopping, standing on one leg. And that was really to test how I was moving, how I was processing speed, and how I was coordinating. So yeah, that was really the process. I got my results quite, pretty much a few days later. And she told me that, I have this learning difficulty called dyspraxia. And she told me that 1 in 10 people actually have this learning difficulty.
How did your diagnosis affect you in the immediate aftermath?
The aftermath of being diagnosed, I think it didn't really sink in for a really long time. It just kind of, because the way it had been sort of set up was more, really geared around getting extra time. I didn't really think that much of it. I didn't realize just how much it had affected my day-to-day life and my whole journey up until this point. And I think that there were certain things that I had to start questioning maybe later on, which was like, will I be able to race? Because obviously having a coordinational delay impacts how how you drive a car. And then I think as I started going deeper into it, I realized that, I'm not going to be able to go out and be the next Lewis Hamilton. But I definitely shouldn't give up on my dreams, because I knew that intuitively I was feeling the rhythms of a car, and maybe there were things that I was struggling with to unlock advanced performance, but it definitely didn't mean I was a bad driver or anything like that, because I was getting podiums. And I'm really glad I didn't give up, because like 15 years later, I've only really learned so much about racing, and that I definitely don't think I should, if I'd walked away, I would have really felt very unfulfilled. But yeah, I think actually when I started researching this topic of dyspraxia, particularly for my TED talk, is really when a lot more, I realized a lot more just like how much I'd been navigating throughout my whole life. And it was really what the educational psychologist said to me at that moment, that, because I asked her this question, like, how have I been able to stay in such a academic and highly recognized school if I have such a disparity in my learning? And she told me that I'd been basically rewiring processes in my brain to keep up with the educational system. And when I was writing the speech for my TED talk, it was really when I did this huge reflection about the last 15 years and how I'd basically been doing that. So now I think I'm just so much more consciously aware of it, that I'm being able to put in the right strategies to deal with it.
What was your family's reaction?
My family's reaction, they were very supportive. They nurtured me throughout the whole process. At that time, there wasn't that much information, so in a way, they weren't quite sure exactly the strategies that they needed to put in place. But the best thing they could have given me at that moment was, to just encourage me to go after my dreams and to not let this affect whatever I wanted to follow and pursue in life.
Did you look at any famous examples to get you through the tougher days?
In those days, which was around the early 2000s, again, this topic wasn't really discussed. It was definitely a hidden learning difficulty. There just wasn't that much information about it. So when we look at role models, that information wasn't there. But throughout the years, what I had actually sort of started discovering as more and more people became vocal about it. There were some really famous examples actually, and one of them was Daniel Radcliffe, who of course played Harry Potter. And he spoke a lot about how he had suffered from dyspraxia. So that was really interesting. And actually another one that I found to be really, really interesting was Albert Einstein. Although dyslexia and dyspraxia weren't things that were detected in his days, a lot of scientists, when studying his life, have kind of maybe come to the realization that he did suffer from dyspraxia because he couldn't tie his shoelaces, for example, at the age of 16, which is like a classic sign. And then it became well known that, you know, he also suffered from other learning difficulties as well. So that's really interesting in terms of like just thinking about, you know, people who've gone on to achieve great things and not letting whatever they might have as a hindrance really affect what they've been set out to achieve.
Many people who live with learning difficulties actually refer to them as their superpower. Do you have a similar outlook?
I actually do think it is a bit of your own internal superpower, because actually, you know, people who have learning difficulties, they look at the world in such a different way, and they come up with their own unique ways and processes to really innovate in the world around them. And I really, really, truly believe this is so true in my case, because obviously operating in two worlds, which is so heavily geared towards coordination, which is music and motorsport, and now kind of spending 15, 20 years, whatever it is, in those industries, I can really look back and see that I've come up with my own ways to really succeed and kind of innovate in them as well. My own unique ways to really galvanize my creativity and do things that other people aren't doing in really, really different ways. So I do think it is your own superpower, and you know, you should always look at everything as a positive and find ways to find and draw positives out of the negatives as well, particularly.
What do you make of the current attitudes towards learning difficulties?
I think the current attitudes towards learning difficulties are getting like better. There's definitely a lot more awareness, but it's still not, you know, it's still not fully there yet. Like there's still a long road to go with, you know, with the awareness into this, and particularly integrating that into schools and how to support children who may have these kind of things, because again, these things are super, super recognized in the early years. Some of the classic signs of dyspraxia are like not being able to cut with a scissor properly when you're very young, being clumsy, struggling with things like maths. And these are like, you know, things that parents may not see as actually having something else, something underlying beneath that. And particularly for dyspraxia, which does get kind of misinterpreted with dyslexia a lot when people hear about it. There isn't that many like groups. You know, you have to really look deep to find the support groups to figure out, you know, what are the next steps for you as a parent or as an adult or as a child to navigate around these things. So I do think there's a lot more that can be done for sure.
What are your top tips for those who have been diagnosed or suspect they may have a learning difficulty?
My top tips for anybody who is going through a learning difficulty is really to be aware of what's going on in their body, not just physically, but also in their mind, because there is a lot happening that does affect your day to day. And, you know, you need to be able to put in strategies in place to deal with some of this stuff, because it can be very overwhelming. You know, particularly when you're younger, me personally, I dealt with a lot of insomnia because there's just so much happening that it can become, you know, it can stop you from sleeping because you're worried, you're anxious. So some of the things that I like to do a lot to help myself navigate this is the classic things, which I think can also help anyone really in their life. But meditation is definitely key, and being very disciplined about that. Making time for things like yoga. Qigong is something that I do a lot, because Qigong actually helps you a lot, not only with meditation, but it helps you a lot with movement as well. And it's very, very grounding. So I highly recommend that. And then it's also about obviously having a healthy diet, not becoming addicted to sugar. And I definitely went through that in my life. And it was a really long journey to kind of step away from that. But I've seen that, you know, now being less addicted to sugar means that you're less reactive to certain things. You just don't realize how much it affects you and how much it can have such a negative impact on your life. So really, really being, non-negotiable about your diet and being healthy. And, maybe, for example, for myself, like I've really adopted the frameworks of Ayurveda and understood what my body type is according to the sort of ancient Indian knowledge. And that's really helped as well. And so that's definitely one of the things. And then I have alluded to this in the past, but obviously the supplements you take as well are really, really important. I don't think you need to take medicines for these types of things. I think you can be very holistic with your approach. And if you take supplements regularly, things like turmeric, things like magnesium, zinc, CBD, I've talked a lot about that as well. I think over time, you'll really see how your body responds positively to these things. And of course, probiotics as well is really crucial in all of that. So definitely that. And then, doing sports as well will really help. I've noticed that obviously I love to race cars. So I'm, going into that sport on a deeper level than just, playing it here and there. But I've noticed that when I do other sports, things like skiing, things like swimming, tennis, learning coordination and balance through other sports has really, really helped as well. And I think that's really, really crucial as well, just always staying active and making time for that as well. So I think these would be some of my tips. And then if you really feel like, you're really, really struggling and you need more than just what you can integrate into your daily routine, I think go out and get the help that you need. Go and seek CBT, for example, cognitive behavioral therapy that really can help in rewiring some of your brain in the way that you respond to situations. And also recognize that if there are people in your life who are not supporting you in this journey and making it difficult, speak out against that. If teachers are not supporting you, make sure you let the people who are in charge of them know that you're not getting the right support. And that's really, really important in some of these things. So just another thing actually that I want to add in there as well is that if you are going through a learning difficulty, just always remember to break everything down into really, really bite-sized, manageable chunks. And I know that might sound a little bit basic, but I've always found that if you don't understand truly the foundation of a particular thing, whether it's math, science, whatever it is, it's going to be really, really hard to unlock then the next level of learning. And I've really found that to be true as well, like with things like music and motorsport. For example, in music production, if I don't spend a lot more time really understanding the fundamental core and the basics of something or a technique, then it just becomes so much harder. And my brain is trying to race to the next stage, but it won't get there unless really the fundamental core is absolutely nailed. So yeah, definitely don't remember to do that as well.
What advice would you give to the friends and family of those who have a learning difficulty?
So that leads me quite nicely onto my final thoughts about this, and that's really your friends and family. So apart from the educators that are supporting you, obviously your friends and family play a critical role in your support system. And I think there has to be a lot of sensitivity around it, because if your friend, your spouse, or your child has it, you need to remember that this is something that affects them on a day-to-day basis with everything that they're doing. It affects how they might react to something, because sometimes, there's just so much pressure that, you might respond negatively. And I think, you've got to be nurturing in your approach. You've got to maybe look into really deeply what are the things that are going on around their mind. And these are some of the things that are going on in their mind, things like just being completely overwhelmed, not being able to put sequences together, struggling with just things that on a day-to-day basis you might forget, actually can have a really big detrimental impact. So researching the topic, joining groups, like there are community groups on Facebook that have actually had a huge amount of knowledge that's being shared amongst parents, teachers, and people who are affected. And again, 1 in 10 people do suffer from dyspraxia, and so it's more common than you may think. So just always being mindful about how you respond, and really being encouraging towards people, and really letting them know that you can get there if you do things in a step-by-step approach, and that failure is also very important to succeed. And sometimes, we get so despaired when we fail and we give up. But I think adopting a mind frame of not giving up, and And really, sticking with that is going to build the resilience within the people around you that are going through this thing.